Hi, my name is Laura Liu, and I am here with Taylor Russell. We are with Indiana-Purdue University in Columbus, presenting Farming Practices as Funds of Knowledge with the Transcending Barriers for Success conference. The purposes and need for our research. The purposes for this study are to understand how culture and farming practices shape one another, consider how farming practices and knowledge serve as important funds of knowledge, and to consider how to integrate these understandings into elementary curricula and instruction and elementary teacher preparation to support better multicultural, multilingual learners and families. The need for the research: multicultural, multilingual classrooms need curricula and instruction that affirms and engages student backgrounds and knowledge as resources for everyone in the classroom to learn from and to support the learning of all students. Also, integration of such curriculum and instruction into pre-K through 12 classroom context requires preparing teacher candidates with curricular knowledge and instructional capacities for this. Taylor is going to present our theoretical framework.
Funds of knowledge. Knowledge students bring from their families and home communities to the classroom as resources to support learning through greater family engagement, concept and skill development, curricular relevancy, and positive environments. Some examples may include home language use, family values and traditions, caregiving practices, family roles and responsibilities, and professional knowledge. U.S. public schools have not acknowledged the strategic and cultural resources or funds of knowledge multilingual learners bring to the classroom from home environments. Humanizing pedagogies have drawn on students politicized funds of knowledge to support critical thinking, literacy skills, political participation by connecting lived experiences to school curricula. Harper found environmental sustainability science to be a meaningful way to integrate Karen immigrant family funds of knowledge into K-6 curricula and instruction.
The methods for our research: this qualitative study engaged grounded theory analysis to understand how culture and farming practices shape one another from the perspectives of participants who have farming experience. We collected data, including 30 to 45-minute interviews with 4 participants who were identified through a purposive selection process. All 4 participants were selected to participate in the study because they had farming knowledge and experience in a US region and in an international region, culturally, ecologically, and politically distinct from their own. And the interviews invited participants to consider how culture shapes and is shaped by farming practices in the US and the international region where they farmed. We used constant comparative analysis to identify themes and sub-themes emerging from the interview data, and these were not predetermined beforehand. This analysis process involved recording responses to the interview questions in a chart, highlighting responses that focused on the US context in one color and the international context in another. And the next layer of analysis involved reviewing this chart for key themes that emerged, including theme-based comparisons. Finally, thematic findings were considered for how farming practices as funds of knowledge might inform and be integrated into curricular instruction to support multicultural learners while meeting key professional standards for teacher preparation. Taylor is going to share with us an overview of our findings.
This study finds that culture shapes and is shaped by farming practices. This study demonstrates specific ways U.S. farming practices contrast with farming practices in international settings, including automated versus manual labor, individual versus social farming, climate impact on food cultivation, institutionalized versus personalized practices, and politics of land ownership.
Looking more specifically at each one of these findings: first, automated versus manual labor. One participant reflected on the necessity to be well-versed in technology to be able to farm in the US. And she said, here in the US, we are so reliant on technology and the data it gives us. In contrast, in Ecuador, she described farming as super hands-on, and that a farmer would rather have, might rather have cows they know personally and 20 cows they milk every day, whereas in the US, a farmer might have 10,000 cows on a big farm. Individual versus social farming. One participant reflected in the Philippines, there were family groups working together in the gardens and fields, and that farming was part of their social life. So there was connection there with the culture that happens a lot less in the farms here. Another participant who had experience in Bolivia emphasized near the end of his interview to get to know your neighbors. And this was a transformational reflection he had in his time in Bolivia, and he felt applied both internationally and in US context. The third theme, looking at the impact of climate on food cultivation, the participant who farmed in the Philippines highlighted that where we live determines the climate and what is possible to grow, and this influences the kinds of foods that are enjoyed at family and community gatherings. The fourth finding, institutionalized versus personalized practices. One participant who farmed in Ecuador and Peru described the value that farmers hold there for knowing each cow personally, whereas in America, she felt farmers are taught to go big and do what makes it easier, whereas in Peru, the focus was take care of yourself, take care of the land, and take care of others. She reflected feeling like there was more pride in what Ecuadorians and Peruvians grew because they knew it was feeding their neighbors in the community, but in America, sometimes it can just seem more like an industry. Finally, the last theme in our findings, the politics of land ownership. One participant reflected on observing land permit applications stacked in one pile for those with the right connections and another pile without such connections, and the impact of political leaders and the consequences this has on farmers and their ability to access resources needed to farm. So Taylor is going to highlight what this means in terms of connecting our findings to the broader discussions in the research on this.
Farming practices as funds of knowledge. This study offers insights into the important connections between culture and farming practices and demonstrates ways that farming practices are funds of knowledge integral to communities and their cultures. These findings are important for teachers seeking to support all learners, including multicultural, multilingual learners who may immigrate to a region and bring a farming background with them.
So looking at each of the themes, automated versus manual labor, you might ask students to examine values and limitations of automated and manual farming practices in the US and international regions. Students might debate the pros and cons of using automated farming equipment and how their own values interact with the cultural values of these regions. Student groups might learn about and argue for the value of knowing every cow in small farms, while other groups might learn about and argue for the business value of producing high volumes. Individual versus social farming and the impact of climate might be combined. Students, teachers might invite parents, older siblings, instructional aides, or others in local multicultural, multilingual communities to visit and share about their own experiences with farming practices in international regions. And students also might research the climate of different regions and how climate shapes the kinds of foods grown there and the specific dishes and recipes there. And finally, institutionalized versus personal farming combined with politics of land ownership. Students might examine how institutionalized and personalized approaches to farming shape and are shaped by the politics of land ownership, how the national and local policies of land ownership shape attitudes toward the land and practices, and compare similarities and differences across regions. Looking at implications for elementary curriculum instruction, understanding similarities and distinctions across regional farming practices can support teachers in integrating this knowledge into curriculum instruction, and there are many ways in which these themes connect with the next generation science standards listed there. We'd be happy to email with you about these. As far as teacher preparation goes, this study offers valuable implications for institutions of teacher preparation and suggests that the integration of farming knowledge as funds of knowledge into teacher preparation coursework is valuable for multicultural and multilingual classrooms. This work meets teacher preparation standards for both CAPE and TESOL, with the standards also listed, and we'd be glad to email with you about either of those sets of standards either. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us, and we would be glad to email with you more about this. Thank you so much for your time. And this is the end of our presentation.